Welcome everyone to our webinar, and thank you for joining us today via Zoom. I realise that some of you it's afternoon, some of you it's the morning, so wherever you are, and welcome to this session. So I'll just briefly introduce myself. I'm Anna. I'm a PhD candidate in human rights at the University of London, and I'm also a research affiliate at CMI. So my own work focuses on issues related to gender, sexual violence, and transitional justice. So I'm very interested to be moderating this discussion today. We're delighted to finally be able to organise this seminar with Olga Velásquez. We'd originally planned for this in March, but understandably had to move online and have a different format. So we're very lucky that she's able to join us today from her home in Colombia. This seminar has been organised as part of a seminar series at the Centre on Law and Social Transformation. And the seminar series focuses on issues related to transitional justice in Norway and beyond. The Centre is a UIB and CMI initiative that brings together researchers who research law as an instrument of social change. So Olga's research fits perfectly into that category, I think. So we'll start, I'll just give you a bit of a logistical how this day will all be organised. So we'll start with a presentation of her research on the Mothers of the Candelaria and how women have used their identities as mothers to mobilise against violence and promote change in Colombia. I will then open a discussion with Olga, some points that I have drawn from her presentation, and then turn to questions from the audience. So please feel free to submit your questions at any point in the chat, and I will keep an eye on it. And you should be able to very easily see the chat function on the bottom of Zoom, and you can just type your questions in there and we'll ask them at some point later on. So Anya is helping out with us today, so thank you so much to everyone at Bergen Global for helping us move this online and for getting it in action. Before handing over to Olga and her presentation, I'll just briefly introduce her. So her work focuses on social legal studies, law and gender, and transitional justice. She holds a bachelor in law from IEFAT University in Medellin and a master's degree in the same area of studies from the University de los Andes in Colombia. She has an MPhil in Latin American Studies from the University of Oxford and has worked as a judicial assistant for the Colombian Constitutional Court and as a legal advisor to the Colombian Ministry of Justice. She has been academic staff at the University of de los Andes as well. So we're very happy to have you here, Olga, and I think I'll hand over to you now. So we should be able to see her presentation in just a second. Thanks, Anya.
Thank you, Anna, for your presentation. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me for this seminar.
Can you, her video's on?
Can you hear me now? Hi. So I will share my presentation now.
It's on mine, Anya. Is it? Oh, here. Sorry, we're just having a slight technical problem, so we'll just Anya is working on it, so we'll be back with her in just a moment.
Okay.
So yeah, so just be patient, everyone. We're just so we can hear Olga, but we can't quite see her.
Yeah, she has to turn her video on.
It's on my screen, but I'm not sure if it's on anyone else's. Is your video is on, Olga?
Yes, I'm sharing everything, but I will just double check just in case.
You can okay, so we can hear, and apparently some people can hear and see you, so we'll continue and we'll hand over to your presentation. Thank you, Olga.
Okay, so thank you, Anna, for your presentation, and thank you everyone who is joining me for this seminar. I would like to thank the Center on Law and Social Transformation for the invitation to participate on this discussion. And also I would like to thank Anna for discussing this, my work. So first, I will briefly introduce the results of my research, mobilizing as mothers against violence, the case of Mothers of the Candelaria in Medellin, Colombia. This presentation is divided in three main sections, or I will discuss like three main points. First, the context of the case of the Mothers of the Candelaria. Second, motherhood in Latin America. And finally, I will talk about my case. So this work introduces the mobilization strategy of a group of women in Colombia. So the group is known as Mothers of the Candelaria. The Mothers were established 20 years ago, formed as a group of women defending the memory of the victims of forced disappearance during the Colombian armed conflict. So before I discuss this, I would like to give just a little bit of context about the armed conflict in Colombia for the people who are not experts or don't know a lot about what's going on in the country. So beginning to explain the depth, horror, and the violence of the Colombian internal armed conflict is the purpose of this presentation. So there is not a general consensus regarding the origins and causes of the armed conflict in Colombia, but over the years, an enormous amount of research has been conducted to determine the roots of the conflict as well as the trajectory of the multiple manifestations of violence in the country. For the purpose of my research, I locate the beginning of the contemporary armed conflict in Colombia in the events known as La Violencia. When discussing the origins of the armed conflict in Colombia during the 20th century, the common starting point is the fact that violence was nourished due to the tensions between the two main political parties, the liberals and the conservatives. Political violence was exacerbated during the La Violencia, followed by the formation of the guerrilla groups in the 1960s, the emergence of the drug economy that fueled the ongoing violence in the country, and the rise of the paramilitary forces. Towards the end of the 1980s and 1990s, drug traffickers, guerrillas, and paramilitaries work in alliance or in conflict with clientelists, politicians, cattle owners, the military, and the police. After the demobilization of the paramilitary and the peace agreement with the FARC, new armed actors became part of the political landscape of the country. During the long-lasting armed conflict in Colombia, Antioquia, that it's showed in the map in the color yellow, has been the region with the highest number of victims in the country. Between 1985 and 2014, 1 out of 5 victims live in Antioquia. And when excluding crimes such as forced displacement and death threats, the proportion rises to almost 1 out of 3 victims. So to add something important, we should know in order to comprehend why the mothers mobilize and what is their cause, that enforced disappearance is defined as violence intentionally deployed in a context of extreme rationalization of violence, which consists of the combination of the victim's deprivation of liberty, the removal of their legal protection, and the concealment of information regarding their whereabouts. In Colombia, more than 60,000 people disappeared between the 1970 and 2015. To give you an idea of how difficult is this sort of crime, this number, 60,000, is higher than the number of disappeared during the dictatorships in Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay combined. So that's the context of the armed conflict in Colombia and the crime of enforced disappearance. So now to enter the discussion about women mobilizing in Latin America. So my research examines how mothers mobilize in Latin America. This work attempts to categorize mothers' mobilization by how they mobilize. It explores the discursive tools that are used by mothers to identify, to protect, and build solidarity for and from a common struggle. Specifically, it examines what is distinctive about the mothers of the Candelaria. My research reveals that the use of religion is the most salient difference, thus leading to a more specific research question, that is, why is religion used as a mobilizational tool by the mothers of the Candelaria? I also tried to cut a new categorization of motherhood movements in Latin America. And emerging from my field work with the Mothers of the Candelaria, I propose a new kind of mothers movement called Pious Motherhood. So recent discussions of women mobilization in Latin America had been devoted to the mobilization of groups that identify themselves as feminists with a feminist agenda. In this way, the focus has been on the case of collectives that fight for the eradication of violence against women. That is the case that those are the pictures that you are seeing now on your screen. So that's the case as the Colectivo Las Tesis that began in Chile, Ni Una Menos, Not One Less, or the Green Scarf, that it's the movement that supports the guarantee of abortion rights in Latin America. Meanwhile, there are other groups that opt to mobilize as mothers seeking their sons and daughters who were lost during dictatorships or during the internal armed conflict in their countries. In comparative terms, there is nothing new or unusual about mothers mobilizing against violence. Latin America might be considered the origin of such movements, famously originating with the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, in Argentina, but those movements have spread around the world. What this thesis explores and my research explores are the variations in mothers' mobilization. It focuses in the analysis of Latin America because of the role the region has played in generating these sort of movements. So mothers and motherhood in particular played an outstanding role during decisive times in Latin America, from the Cuban mothers in 1957 who sent their sons and daughters to be part of the revolution, to the mothers who protect their children from the socialist menace in Chile. Mobilizing as mothers gives women power. It gives them access to the public sphere and a privileged position, given that the cult status of motherhood remains uncontested by men in Latin America. So as part of this review of how mothers mobilize in Latin America, I propose 5 broad and overlapping categories of mothers movements in the Americas. So first, domestic mothers movements, the right-wing mothers movements, protected mothers movements, super madres, and the national revolutionary movements. And finally, the category that emerges from my fieldwork that is called pious motherhood. So domestic mothers movement is understood as the women's use of maternal responsibilities to justify their engagement beyond the domestic sphere. So mothers mobilized initially in response to political and economic conditions that undermine their ability to fulfill their traditional family expectations. So women challenged their role as restricted to the household, moving towards the expansion of their traditional nurturing role in the public sphere. That will be the case, for instance, of the communal kitchens in Peru or comedores populares. The right-wing mothers movement, so these are women who defend motherhood by seeking to protect women's traditional roles and their family by serving those who can protect them from what is considered dangerous. So this kind of motherhood flourished when scarcity, hunger, and poverty were a threat. It could be a real or an imaginary threat for the mothers. In the long run, these mothers served the state rather than confronted the state. That will be the case, for instance, of anti-gender ideology groups in Brazil, and also when women, especially mothers, mobilize against Allende in Chile. Protecting mothers movements is the case that I think everyone is more familiar with. The mothers of La Plaza de Mayo are placed in this category as the classic example of militant motherhood. Protected mothers arise in Latin America with the disappearance of their sons and daughters under military dictatorships, internal armed conflicts, or as a product of a terror strategies perpetrated by the states. An additional category is what I found that it's called super madres, as well as national revolutionary movements. So the thing that they have in common is that they use the traditional virtues of motherhood to craft the perfect image of the mother through difficult times, or to present a model of virtue to the nation. These kinds of motherhood can be attributed to public figures. The concept of perfect motherhood shaped by the state is used to inspire mothers, setting the maternal characteristics that are applauded by the nation, and it can be found on left-wing revolutions or right-wing governments. Revolutionary mothers refers to the women who are part of the guerrilla movement and interpret the armed resistance against the state as an essential feature and as an essential part of motherhood. Finally, so this is the category that I developed during my research that is called Pious Motherhood. So Pious Motherhood is a new kind of category that seeks to explain the mobilization of mothers against the backdrop of an internal armed conflict. Connecting religion with motherhood as a mobilizational strategy is new among the modern mobilization strategies in Latin America. Pious Motherhood uses a selection of the traditional Catholic symbols to engage in public demonstrations of mourning that sparks deeper conversations regarding the underlying reasons behind why a group of women in a context of generalized violence choose to publicly denounce the crimes committed against their families. So exploring religion and motherhood in Latin America is crucial to comprehend why mothers might use this cultural resource to mobilize in the context of societies that are deeply divided by conflicts, where the Catholic devotion influenced the behavior of legal and illegal armed actors and civil society towards women. So Pious Motherhood, as I already said, comes from my work with the Mothers of the Candelaria. So the data that I collected for this project was gathered between July and September of 2019 and December 2019, as well as January of 2020. The Mothers of the Candelaria, Paths of Hope, are a group of women who congregate every week at the Candelaria Church, located at the heart of Medellin. Medellin is the capital of Antioquia, and Antioquia, well, is a state of Colombia. So they march in front of the Candelaria Church, in front of that is also part of the Berrio Park. So just to give you a picture, the mothers are surrounded by the bustling of the street peddlers selling different forms of merchandise under small tarts. Among the most popular items in the park are the pocket-sized plastic prints of the image of the Virgin on one side and a short prayer on the other. And the mothers have gathered every Friday to conduct a public protest displaying the names and pictures of their sons and lost relatives to ask for the truth regarding their missing families. So for over an hour, they chant, "We want them alive, free, and in peace," which is repeated constantly in interviews and public congregations. So the mothers combine a different set of symbols and strategies to express their message. So among the symbols that they use, one that is like the biggest one of the biggest one for me, is the map of the disappeared, as well as the Catholic signs like the Church of La Candelaria and the Virgin Mary. And among the strategies that they use to mobilize is the category of Pious Motherhood and the weekly march that is called Plantón. So the activities and demands of the mothers had become part of the public agenda over the last 2 decades, setting their activist profile apart from the traditional role of women as victims of the armed conflict. So the Mothers of the Candelaria are the maternal face of the victims. They are the only group that is able of linking a traditional symbol venerated by perpetrators, women, men, children, hitmen, and motherhood. So they combine the virgin and motherhood in order to gain support and carving themselves as a central piece of the history of the city, as a witness, as well as a victim of the armed conflict in Colombia. So the issue with the Pious Motherhood is that it invites to do an analysis of how mothers' movements had evolved in Latin America, coexisting with others, women's and feminist groups in the region. So that's why I was explaining a bit about the context of what are the causes that women are currently mobilizing. So the abortion rights, violence against women. So this is sort of like a contrast between these kind of movements with a feminist agenda, with a clear feminist agenda, and the Mothers of La Candelaria that have like a different cause as well as a different way of mobilizing. So using symbols traditionally associated with a nurturing and suffering motherhood to advance their claims, the Mothers of the Candelaria joining with the transgressive defiance of the public space set by other mothers groups who mobilize for the well-being of their families, but introduced to their bond with the church, above all, their bond with the Virgin as a source of empathy, not only because people can relate to the motherhood of the Virgin, but also they connect with the religiosity of a popular symbol. And this popular symbol is venerated, that the popular symbol is the Virgin Mary, and is venerated by the people in Antioquia and mainly in Medellin. So finally, the Mothers of the Candelaria are a new case of motherhood mobilization in Latin America. My aim in this presentation was to explain how I developed the framework of pious motherhood as one of the different categories of women who use motherhood to claim political participation, economic rights, and their rights as victims of the armed conflict or as victims of dictatorships. So pious motherhood emerges as a strategy that works in the specific context of a city with a long-standing tradition of venerating the Catholic Blessed Virgin Mary. And this virgin is considered is the icon of motherhood in the region. So I think we can discuss this a little bit in the Q&A. So your comments and your questions are more than welcome. So thank you all for hearing my presentation. And I think I will stop here now.
I think it's fascinating to hear about a group that we don't necessarily know that much about. And I could definitely see some great parallels between this and some other groups in Latin America, in Europe and beyond. And I feel like this is a very good illustrative case of this phenomenon of women's mobilization after violence. As you rightly mentioned, women are often at the front and center of political protests, but are often framed as fighting for issues such as abortion rights and so on. So it's interesting to hear more about a group who use their identity as mothers to achieve justice and recognition, and also in the sort of varied ages of these women that are involved in this protest. So I wanted to kind of start off the discussions by asking you how you came to research this area. What motivated you? How did you learn about this group? And any other sort of thoughts that you have on that question would be great.
Okay, so this research is part of my MPhil thesis in a department of Latin American studies. So, I always have like this interest on how women mobilize in Latin America, and also because in recent years we have seen how like these fantastic and amazing demonstrations of women all across Latin America fighting for different causes. So I choose the Mothers of Candelaria because they're a quite representative group in Medellin, and also because of the impact that they have as the maternal phase of the conflict, because they on purpose they choose to mobilize as mothers, and also to use this Catholic symbol as an important part of their movement identity. Because in Colombia, and I think I mentioned this in my presentation, there is nothing new about saying that women mobilize, and also that women are mobilizing, searching for peace, and also searching for truth and justice. But the way that women mobilize in Colombia, they choose to do it as women. So they said like, we are the women who are walking for the truth, or we are just like using the term women for their mobilization, or they join. So for instance, in the cases of people mobilizing for the rights and of truth and justice, and mainly searching for the people who disappeared, are known as members of like family members that are looking for their sons and daughters. So it's not like motherhood is not a central issue for them. And even though a lot of the people that are part of these organizations are women and are mothers. But it was quite interesting for me was to use the case of is to learn more about this group uh, of women mobilizing right in the city center of Medellin, that is quite a religious place. So it was quite interesting to see how they choose to like just not to follow the traditional role of motherhood in Antioquia, but in a sense just using that motherhood in order to fight for the right to be there and to seek the truth about their what happened with their children.
Thank you. I think that brings in another interesting question of how these women are perceived then by the outside society, so surrounding society. Because I mean, if they're using their identity as mothers, and that's kind of how they're traditionally seen, but then they're using that to promote activism and something which is not necessarily traditionally a women's role in some. So I was wondering if you can just elaborate a little bit on how they are seen by other people within the same country context.
Okay. So I think the main issue with this specific case is the context where they mobilize, where they choose to protest. So they select, and I think this is part of one of my slides that I give you like a little map of the city center. So that's like the encounter point. Since the foundation of the city, like the main part of the city is supposed to be the church of the Candelaria. So the women, the Mothers of Candelaria, do a weekly protest every Friday in front of the church. So and they do it after the mass. So they have like this stellar time for people to see them. And people normally, the reaction that they have when they see the mothers is just like they want to know more, like why they are protesting, what they are doing it in front of a church. And also there is this feeling of everyone has a mother, so everyone can relate with the motherhood of them. Like they, of course, it's like the pain that only a mother can express, and also because they are attached to the church, so attached in the sense of like physically attached to the church of La Candelaria, they can see this parallel with the Virgin Mary. So with this image that we have of the Mater Dolorosa, and also the Virgin is a central image in the city, and it's central because it surrounds the whole town. So we can see the Virgin not only inside the church, but we can also see the Virgin in different neighborhoods in the city. So it's quite normal to have like a small statues of the Virgin in the corners of Medellin. And one quite interesting thing, and that was my last slide, is the Virgins in the metro. So the metro is a public transport system in Medellin. It has 27 different stations, stops, and in those 27, 22 out of those 27 stations had a picture or a painting of the Virgin. So the reasoning behind why they choose to put, like, because Colombia is not, so in terms of constitutional law and also what is included in the constitution, we have freedom of religion. We are not officially, like in the constitution, we are not Catholic. So having this display of a Virgin in 22 stations across town is quite is something that might be shocking for people to see, just like see the Virgin there. And it is not like something that comes from the 19th century or the beginnings of the 20th century, because the metro was built in the 80s and the Virgins were painted in the 90s. So and it's common for people to see the Virgin in the metro, and they just like act like this is okay, this is important in the city and is normal in the city. And the reason why they put the Virgins there was to protect the stations from terrorist attacks. So and that's the official response of the metro. It's like, we decided to paint the Virgins in order to protect this public transport system. So I think that the way that people perceive the Mothers of La Candelaria is because of the place that they select to protest, and also because of the different symbols that people can relate, the Virgin with the mothers, motherhood with the mothers. So I think that's it.
I think that's a very interesting kind of intertwining between religion and motherhood and protest, and kind of bringing all of these different threads together into one kind of collective strategy. So I was wanting to build on that a little bit and ask you, you mentioned that they do sort of weekly protests in this central square. And I was wondering what other strategies they have to protest or to raise awareness of these issues, but also what their ultimate aim is in doing this, these kinds of awareness raising and promotion things.
Okay, so different things. So the main strategy that they have in order to gain support and to publicly denounce what happened with their children is to protest, is to do this planton, is to be in front of the church every Friday. But the mothers have, like, of course, because they are one of the central groups of victims of the armed conflict in Colombia, they have they can participate and they can engage in discussions with the government. Actually, one of the mothers, the leader of the group, Teresita Gaviria, she was part of the group of victims that went to Havana during the peace process with the FARC. So they were part of this commission of victims that were there to discuss the issue of victims and the armed conflict. So they have like different ways of gaining support to their cause. But I think it's quite cemented with the issue of their weekly main campaign, main strategy of protesting in front of the church. Thinking, so another way that they do it is by going to different towns in Antioquia to support other women groups, other victims groups, and they always choose to go to the central church. So if they're going to a small town, they said like, okay, we are going to protest, but we are going to protest in front of the church so everyone can see. So that's a question about the strategies. Can you repeat the last bit of your question?
Yeah, it was more just how I think the strategies you kind of answered what I was going for. So thank you. Yeah, and I think it was more to just bring in questions of how they use their own symbolism, because you obviously mentioned that they use the symbol of the Virgin Mary. And then I also, in your work, you mentioned that they use the symbols of different like headscarves or pans or something like that in order to kind of promote themselves. And I think those are very interesting symbols to use, because those are very easy to access and available, and obviously represent motherhood in a different way. So I was wondering what kinds of other symbols they use in these protests.
Okay, so I think that this is like a common trend among mothers who mobilize, and especially like we can see this in the way that the mothers of Plaza de Mayo in Argentina mobilize is like pieces of fabric with the names of their children, photographs, and an interesting thing that they did with the photographs is to create a map of the disappeared. So they have like this map of Antioquia, and then decided to put like all the pictures of the people who disappear, as well as the names of the towns where they were last seen. So this a quite a powerful image to see all of these people that are only the people who disappeared, that are like their families are part of this group. So of course there are a lot more, but the way that the mothers of the Candelaria use it, so it's quite shocking to see like, oh my God, all of these people disappear, and you can see that in the map. So it's like, oh, all of the and this map, it always like travels with them when they are doing their protests in different cities, or when they have a meeting with the government, they always go with their map of the disappeared.
That's very interesting. And I kind of, just before I ask my next question, I would like to encourage anyone who is listening to engage with the chat. You can ask your questions in the Q&A section or in the open chat section, and I'll feed them back to Olga if you have any questions you'd like to ask. But just following on from what you mentioned about this sort of map and the amount of victims, I mean, you said that more than 60,000 people disappeared, and that's just a phenomenal number and so heartbreaking. And I was wondering if you could just elaborate on who the victims are, because I think there's some kind of, with these kinds of conflicts, there's often a misconception that these are fighting age people who are maybe part of the guerrilla movement causing problems, those kinds of things. But from what I understand in this case, that is really not true. And these are just very everyday people. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about who these victims are and who the mothers are looking for, in a sense.
Yeah, so the victims of the enforced disappearance are mainly people like men, but there are also women and children. So it goes across the board in terms of age and gender. So that's why it's so difficult to answer the question, because this is something that it always comes up in seminar. In seminars are like, but why they disappeared? Like, why was the reason behind? They were part of the guerrilla, they were part of the army, as well as who did it. So it was the army, it was the guerrilla, it was the paramilitaries. So my answer is always like all of the above. So in terms of like the people who disappeared are men, women, and children, different age, as young as 12 years old, as well as men, and they were like working people, peasants. So it's not, and also people in Medellin, so they have like urban lives. So it's in terms of like what the composition of the people who disappeared, it goes all ages and genders. And in terms of so who did it, they are victims of there are what the mother says is like, we don't know, but we think it was the army or the different guerrilla groups in the country, or the paramilitaries, or just like everyday crimes in the city. So that's also something that it's quite unique in the Colombian context, because the traditional example that people rely on when they hear mothers mobilizing, they think about the mothers of Plaza de Mayo. And in that case was quite different in terms of like the ages of the people who disappeared, as well as who did it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's obviously something that sort of struck right to the heart of Colombia, and seems to have affected pretty much the whole strata of the population, which again, I think is very interesting, because then you have this group of mothers who are collectively mobilizing, but maybe from different perspectives and angles. So we have a couple of questions. So if you do have another question, please feel free to write it into the chat or into the box there. So I'll just read out this first question. So can you expand a bit on this notion of pious motherhood? To what extent is this piousness new in relation to the ever-growing NGOization of everything, but in particular of conservative religious activism, where lay believers have become so central players in the defense of the Catholic Church within the public sphere over the last 40 years in Latin America? So this is quite a long question, so I'll just kind of develop it as well, but I think you can probably read it as well, Olga. Is this a question of politics of visibility and recognition, or are they also making claims for change in terms of policy, or aiming themselves towards the constitutional level? Because the conservative religious actors are certainly lobbying and turning to the judiciary in order to prevent the claims that feminist activists are making.
So the way that I read this pious motherhood category is that it applies in terms of mobilization to acknowledge, like to learn the truth, and also to gain justice, and all of these rights that are deeply connected with what happened with the victims of the armed conflict. I don't see the movement of the Mothers of la Candelaria as opposing the way that feminist groups litigate in the country, and the way that they are searching for the rights of abortion. So I think it's a different discussion in terms of like feminist agenda, and in terms of like this human rights, victims' rights in Colombia. They were part. So when women. So when it was time of this to announce the peace agreement between the Colombian government and the FARC, women were not part of this of this announcement. They were not part of the table. So women's groups in Colombia mobilized in order to participate in the agreement. And it has like it goes to people who have like this quite central feminist agenda, but also different groups as the mothers were asking to be part of it. But I don't see it as a confrontation. I see it as a way of, they are mobilizing for different things, and they are not opposing the feminist agenda. So an example, but it's not about my case, but it's an example in Latin America. For instance, the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo, they support the abortion rights agenda. So it will be like, in a sense, people might think because they are mobilizing as mothers, and because they are using motherhood, and they are talking about this traditional role of women in Latin America, and they are using this as a part of the way they mobilize, they will see it as conservative. But in the case of, for instance, the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo, they don't, because they have this deeply connection about you can be a mother, but when you want to be a mother. So that's why they support the abortion rights agenda. And in the case of Colombia, they are not vocal about this, because I think they see it as a different way of they are mobilizing for different things. So yeah, that's what I pick up from the question.
Thank you. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in and we can get around to answering those. But to kind of build on that a little bit, I was wondering they have, obviously they're sort of targeting, they seem to have a sort of comprehensive agenda in sort of awareness raising rather than necessarily lawmaking. And I was wondering if they do have an ultimate agenda in order to change something in society, or whether it's more to promote their own sort of that they are still looking for their children, if that makes sense.
So yeah, that was a quite an interesting part of the question, and I'm glad you bring it. That is in terms of lawmaking, as well as the constitutional change, and why they mobilize and what they are seeking in terms of legal changes. So something that happened with the mothers, with the mothers of the Candelaria, was that in the search, like while doing the searching for their children, they have to the one thing that they did was going directly to the prisons where the paramilitary leaders were. So they went there, and what they are asking was like the whereabouts of their children, and also like, why did you do this, where they are. So in this whole framework of the Colombian peace agreement, and also when with the peace agreement with the paramilitary, they opposed that the members of the paramilitaries were sent to the United States to comply with the crimes that they committed there, or in connection with the conflict, they committed crimes in the United States. So they were sent to the USA. So the mothers were like, but what about our rights as victims? So in a sense, what they are looking for is to be actively take into account in the different judicial process that involves paramilitary leaders, and in the current issue with the FARC and the special jurisdiction for peace, they are trying to gain access and to have sort of to share the spotlight with the other victims, and to really have access to the truths that are told in the context of the special jurisdiction for peace. So they are quite vocal in terms of what the victims' rights should be, and also what they are asking for, and the different ways that the judicial process should change in order to give a platform to the victims, and not to only have this truth that is not complete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that brings into mind something from my own research, which focuses on a group called the Mothers of Chabernitza. And the Srebrenica massacre was a massacre that happened in 1995 in Bosnia, and 8,000 men and boys were killed. And so this group formulated as a sort of awareness raising of this, but also to find their children, and then eventually were encouraged to go to the UN and lobbied at the UN at The Hague, and eventually achieved justice for some form of justice for what happened, especially against the Dutch battalion who were involved in sort of opening up Srebrenica and sort of allowing this to happen. So this is something I think that links also to other contexts and other cases and countries, and I think it's a very interesting area of research you have there as well, and also looking at the ultimate agendas of these groups. Although they might overlap in some of their aims, their agenda might not be exactly the same. So I've got another question here asking, are the mothers threatened, unsafe, or due to their connection to a respected religious figure and the role of motherhood, are they respected by the different actors within the conflict?
Okay, so the issue with this use of pious motherhood and the connection with the Virgin Mary, they are you can interpret that as a way also to protect themselves. But the reality and what happened with the mothers is that they received death threats because also the way they are portraying motherhood. They are not portraying motherhood in silence, or they are not portraying motherhood inside their households, because they have like this public motherhood, and they are also in this way like it goes against what is considered as a good Catholic mother. So this protection with pious motherhood and the connection with the Virgin, it does not. I don't think it works well in terms of protection, because they are still receiving death threats. And yeah, so that and also, so when you think about other women groups mobilizing for the disappeared, and again I use the case of Mothers of Plaza de Mayo. When they were mobilizing, they were called crazy ladies, and also like the head of the church in Argentina called the mothers like bad Catholic mothers, because they were not like he said something like, you never saw the Virgin Mary screaming in the streets claiming for Jesus. So like even comparing those women with the Virgin Mary is impossible, because they are not portraying like the values and they are not following the lead of the Virgin Mary. They are doing something different. So yeah, this clash with the with this vision of how Catholic women should portray themselves is, yeah, it's quite difficult as well as interesting.
Yeah, it sounds like they're sort of stuck between, like we mentioned before, wanting this activism, but also being pious mothers, good mothers, and then having a religious overtone as well. So it's trying to find their identity within that. Yeah, that must be a challenge, especially like you say, if they're being criticized for activism. So I think yeah, I think it's interesting what you said about their mothers trying to locate their sons and daughters and their children, and also comparing that to the Virgin Mary and the perspectives within sort of that as well. And I think it brings in a lot of questions about what good motherhood is. And I think that's a big challenge. And I wondered if you had any, I think we're nearing the time where we should begin to wrap up. So if you have any final thoughts or considerations about this whole and where your research agenda will go next, because it's a very interesting area of research.
So yeah, thinking about like the different ways motherhood is portrayed in Latin America, I think what I'm thinking about my future research involves like actually going to different, like doing research with other mothers groups, because there are other mothers groups in Colombia. But what is particular, like what is exceptional about the case of Mothers of the Candelaria is this pious motherhood dimension. But the question is like, if religion is something that is quite important in the country, so why other women's groups and mothers groups don't use it? So I think I would love to do more research in Colombia about mothers groups, and also because there are a lot of mothers mobilizing in the search of the disappeared in Latin America. And it's not only in Colombia and Argentina. There are also groups in Chile, in Uruguay, and now in Central America, in Mexico. So yeah, I think I would like to expand my research on others on other mothers groups, as well as this idea of religion of if, and also just to make sure that my idea of pious motherhood probably it's only because of Medellin's context, and it's only that something particular about the Mothers of la Candelaria.
Mhm.
So yeah.
That would be very interesting. We have to invite you back in the next when you kind of continue. It'd be really nice to hear how it's all going and to to follow your research as it continues. I think this is the point where we would usually say thank you and present you with a Law Transform mug. But unfortunately, as you aren't here, we'll just have to save that for another time.
Okay.
And I just want to thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your research, and for just being willing to join us on Zoom and having it relocated from being an in-person seminar. So we hope to meet you in Bergen sometime soon.
Oh, thank you, Anna.
Yeah. Before tying up, I'd like to thank Anya and everyone at Bergen Global for their help and work in organising this and in getting it going. You can find out more about our upcoming events on both the Bergen Global website and on the Law Transform website or through our Facebook pages. And thank you so much, Olga, for joining us. And thank you to everyone else who tuned in for this seminar. I think it was very interesting. I've certainly learned a lot. So thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. And hope everyone has a good evening.
Okay. Thank you, Anna. And thank you all for your comments and questions.